My name's Will Yakowitz. I'm a staff writer here at Forbes magazine, and I cover Vices, which is a collection of beats. I cover the cannabis industry, the gambling industry, and sex. 3 years into the pandemic, something became very clear, that Americans, generally speaking, have really leaned into good old-fashioned bad behavior. You know, the pandemic caused a lot of stress and anxiety, not to mention the horrific human toll it had on the US. In order to deal with this new reality, a lot of Americans, took up their various vices and crutches. So we saw cannabis use go up, we saw alcohol use go up, gambling, and with new streaming platforms like OnlyFans, we saw porn consumption also go up. As stay-at-home orders swept across the country in March 2020, a couple things happened. Alcohol sales jumped 10%, and also for the year, cigarette sales jumped for the first time in 20 years. So the bump these industries saw during COVID has not stopped. It's really this new normal that we've seen. Americans have leaned into vices, and they are sticking with them. The pandemic was a boon to the cannabis industry. Dispensaries were deemed essential businesses, which was important. If you guys remember March 2020, everything was closed except for grocery stores, pharmacies, and liquor stores, right? The distinction of a dispensary being deemed essential was huge. So it's no surprise that cannabis sales increased 46% from 2019 to 2020, and as of last year, sales hit $25 billion. Not only was there a bump due to COVID, legalization has been spreading for years, and we're now reaching like a crescendo. Federal legalization is on the horizon. Two interesting things about consumer behavior to note during the pandemic. Perhaps unsurprisingly, edible sales went up around 50% compared to pre-pandemic levels. That jump could be seen as obvious, right? There was a deadly respiratory virus, so a lot of people leaned into edibles instead of smoking. As the pandemic wore on, pandemic fatigue increased. Pre-rolled joint sales increased 47% compared to pre-pandemic levels. Some of these consumer behaviors make perfect sense, like edibles going up, but the others kind of don't. Nearly a 50% spike in joint sales is pretty remarkable and interesting. The start of the pandemic was a little rocky for the gaming industry. Casinos were shuttered for months due to lockdown orders. Gross gaming revenue in Nevada dropped from $12 billion in 2019 to $7.8 billion in 2020. And it really looked like it was a losing proposition for the entire industry. As COVID restrictions eased and vaccines were rolled out, what we saw is that Americans flocked to Sin City, and they were spending their stimulus checks on gambling. What was, it started off to be a disaster really turned into a 10-month winning streak for Nevada. By the end of 2021, Nevada hit a new state record, hitting $13.4 billion in gross gaming revenue for the year. So Americans were cooped up for months, right? And then as these COVID restrictions eased, people wanted to travel. American gamblers picked up the slack. It's easy to get to Vegas, right? But it's even easier to get to your regional casino. So those casinos have seen big bumps in revenues as well. If you guys remember at the beginning of the pandemic, sports were canceled. Gamblers were really hard pressed to find anything to bet on. In the beginning, people were betting on like table tennis and funny sports like that. But then eventually sports returned, and what we saw is that sports betting really became another national pastime. As states were eager for tax revenue, they embraced sports betting. One state in particular that I think really highlights kind of the fervor around sports betting and the growth of the industry is New York. New York launched its mobile sports betting program in January, and within 2 weeks, the total handle surpassed $1 billion, which is just a mind-boggling number. By February, New Yorkers wagered over $3 billion. Analysts say that they do not see the growth in gambling, and specifically sports betting, contracting anytime soon. Society is now accepting of sports betting. It's not this backroom, cigar smoking type deal. It is a thing that you can do on your couch with your smartphone. While all this growth is good for companies, there are some naysayers. A veteran sports bettor, Bill Krakenberger, told me that he does not think the mainstreaming of sports betting is a good thing in general. His prediction is in 10 years' time, you will not be able to get a seat at a Gamblers Anonymous meeting. He thinks this proliferation of sports betting and the ease and the social acceptance is just going to lead more and more people down gambling addiction. The adult content industry also was transformed during the pandemic. During the height of COVID, a lot of sex workers stopped seeing clients in person. And there were platforms that have already been building up steam and building up audiences like OnlyFans and Is My Girl, Fancentro. A lot of sex workers turned to online platforms to continue working. More people were home, more people were alone, and when you're cut off from society, when you're cut off from your friends and family and loved ones, sex is a human need, right? Just like people turned to smoking a joint or drinking at home alone, a lot of people turned to porn for intimacy or just stimulation, frankly. What we saw was companies like OnlyFans, Fancentro, and other streaming platforms exploded in popularity, both on the consumer end and on the creator end. You can't talk about the adult streaming market without talking about OnlyFans. It is the billion-dollar tech company that porn built. Seemingly overnight, OnlyFans attracted 180 million users and 2 million content creators. And to date, 2 million creators on OnlyFans have earned $5 billion in subscription fees. The company itself saw its revenue skyrocket 540%, hitting $400 million by the end of 2020. The popularity of OnlyFans cannot be overstated. Everybody from, a former pastor to porn stars like Sophie D to mainstream musicians like Cardi B are on that platform. OnlyFans is a really fascinating case study in what happens to businesses when they serve markets like adult content. So as OnlyFans became a multi-billion-dollar company, they started looking for outside funding. And they were having a hard time doing that. A lot of investors are skittish around porn. They also hit a few roadblocks with payment processors. A lot of payment processors like Visa and MasterCard have general morals that, they won't process payments for illegal transactions, and some even, have a hard line with adult content. So OnlyFans tried to pivot away from porn, and it was a disaster. A lot of the creators were up in arms, a lot of the users were up in arms. The decision to pivot back to porn, if you will, was really the only way forward for OnlyFans. What OnlyFans created, and other platforms like it, is a more intimate relationship between the viewer and the creator. If you are looking at like old school pornographic films, right, like on a set, there's distance between the viewer and the creator, the porn stars, right? The distance has been erased. And that has really transformed like appetites for people who are looking for adult content. And I don't think that's going to change. How people make money in the industry and how people consume adult content has been changed forever. There are many different reasons and forces at play here. Two of the most interesting to me are this general nihilism that is really kind of taken over this generation of people who are either coming to age or becoming adults in the pandemic. People are embracing stress relievers, right? But also there's this other thing that I think is even a stronger force is the social acceptance and the legalization. Legalization of sports betting, legalization of cannabis, the social acceptance of adult content. And all these forces really make it okay to do these things. And so I think people are responding by doing exactly that, by doing these things. For now, these economies are economies of scale. Every new state that opens up for cannabis and gambling, that is millions and millions of dollars in tax revenue, but also sales for these companies. These industries are really not going to slow down anytime soon.